What I have for you today are these two rustic, chunky braided ear warmers knit in two totally different ways that everyone from a beginner to advanced knitters can enjoy. You've got my beginner method that will make a lot of sense if you already know how to do a 3-strand braid. Then we'll go over the more advanced version, which is a bit of cable knitting and a special cast on and bind off so that we don't have any extra seaming to do. And for both methods, we're going to use a super bulky weight yarn. Specifically, I used Ice Yarn's Alpine Alpaca, which is a beautiful alpaca wool acrylic blend. And I'll have links to where you can purchase this yarn and some suitable alternatives in the description box below. I also used a pair of 9mm US 13 knitting needles. The headbands are worked flat, which I actually prefer to do on circular needles, but you can absolutely use straight needles as well. The first one, the beginner method, will require a tapestry needle for some easy seaming, and for the advanced headband, we'll also need a crochet hook, some scrap yarn, and an extra needle of any size. For the first headband, we'll literally just make 3 separate strands of knitting and then braid them. Now, as for the stats of each one of these strands, you're going to cast on 4 stitches, purl a row, and then knit a row, and repeat, purl row, knit a row, until your piece measures 22 inches, which for me was about 53 rows. By the way, if you're already an avid finger knitter, you could absolutely do the same thing with finger knitting. Then we'll bind off by knitting the first 2 stitches, pass the first one over, knit, pass the first one over, until you've bound off all 4 stitches of your strand. And then make 2 more. And we're going to seam them all together, so find the underside where your edges are curling under here, and line up each of the 3 bind-off edges. Thread a tapestry needle with one of the tails, and you can just seam each of the 3 edges together by working into these very edge loops. Just be sure to get the tapestry needle through all 3 edges with each pass. Then with one side seamed, you've got your 3 strands just waiting to be braided. And when you get to the end, you may encounter this problem, where the ends are all kind of different lengths. Here, you gotta just finesse the braid, pulling on the short end, pulling out some of the tight braids until the ends are more even. Then, you can seam these ends together just like we did on the opposite end. Finally, it's time to seam your seams together. Again, no need for any fussy seams here. Just sew around and around the very edges of both seams until the whole piece is secure. And here's how your little no-fuss seam will look. All that's left is to weave in all these pesky ends, and you've got yourself a beautiful braided headband that a beginner, loom knitter, or even finger knitter can make. Now for the more advanced method. If you want to up your knitting game and avoid making separate pieces and seaming, You'll enjoy this pattern, which is a simple braided cable that we started with a provisional cast-on. This cast-on lets us pick up stitches later so we can bind off both ends together via the 3-needle bind-off. So to start that elegant process, you're going to pull out that scrap yarn and bonus hook I mentioned earlier. You'll make a slip knot, put it on your hook, and wrap your yarn over the hook and pull through a chain stitch. Again, yarn over and chain. Once more, and 3 chains should do. Now we can grab our needle. Line your needle and hook up like this, with your working yarn behind the needle. Again, you'll yarn over your hook to chain, while simultaneously casting on 1 stitch to your needle. Bring your working yarn to the back of your needle, and do it again. Yarn over to chain and cast on a stitch. Continue like this, chaining and bringing your yarn to the back until you've cast on 12 stitches to your needle. Next, you'll kind of get your needle out of the way, and we gotta just chain a few more chains to make sure nothing comes undone until we want it to. I'm just gonna pull that second to last loop tight and stretch out this last one so we can easily unravel it later. But for now, it's time to start knitting your headband. Grab your working yarn, and you can just knit into the first scrap yarn stitch, and continue knitting each of the scrap yarn stitches on your needle. The next row, and all wrong side rows, is to purl every stitch. And that last one where I fastened on is a little loosey-goosey, so I'm going to hold the tail and purl that stitch and tighten it up. The next row, row 3, is our first cabling row. So it's time to grab that cable needle, and we're going to go right in and slip the first 4 stitches onto that cable needle. We'll hold those stitches in front of our work and go on to knit the next 4 stitches. Then I'd normally knit the 4 stitches off the cable needle, but for this first cable row, things are getting pretty tight, so I'm actually going to slip them back onto my left needle first. Don't worry, I promise the cabling gets easier the more of your piece that we knit. Now I can knit those 4 stitches that were previously on my cable needle. And I'm going to go ahead and knit the last 4 stitches as well. It doesn't look like much yet, but let's knit a little more so we can get a better idea. So again, you'll purl the wrong side row. And we're actually going to just knit the next right side row, row 5. One more wrong side row. And it's time to twist the next 2 strands of our braid on row 7. We'll knit the first 4 stitches, and slip the next 4 stitches, the middle 4, onto our cable needle. This time we're going to hold those stitches in the back of our work, and go on to knit the last 4 stitches. Then, bring those cable stitches around and knit the 4 stitches off your cable needle. It's still pretty tight, but a little more doable this time. Then I'm going to purl a row as the 8th row of this 8-row repeat. I'll work up to the next row 3 to show you that first cable again. Slip the first 4 onto our cable needle. Hold them in front of your work. Knit the next 4. Knit 4 off the cable needle. And knit the last 4 stitches. And we've got a headband that is braiding itself. How cool is that? So you're just going to repeat rows 1 through 8 until your piece measures about 21 inches. And make sure to finish after completing a row 8. Now we're going to bind off and seam these ends together all at once, which starts by picking up our provisional cast-on stitches and unraveling our scrap yarn. You can unravel your scrap yarn as you go, but I actually prefer to pick up all my stitches first. I just find that easier. So I'm going to find my first stitch here and insert my needle over the left leg of the stitch and under the right leg of the stitch. Again, over the left leg of the next stitch, under the right leg, over, under, over, under. And this is why I like to keep the scrap yarn attached. I feel like I can really see exactly which of my stitches is the last row before the scrap yarn, and I'm not picking up that second to last row accidentally. So I've got 11 stitches picked up, and it looks like I'm all out of stitches. But there's this little wonky scrap yarn stitch on the end here, and he's holding on to one more stitch. It looks like it's from the row below, but it's actually part of our 12 stitches. So again, over the left leg, under the right leg to pick him up as well. Now we've got all our headband stitches picked up, and we can unravel the crochet chain. Ta-da! My first row of stitches is live and back on my needle, ready for the 3 needle bind off. Like I mentioned, the 3rd needle can really be any size. And I've got my needles lined up with the wrong side of the headband facing out. I'm going to insert my 3rd needle, knitwise, into both of these first stitches and knit them together. Now I can drop both stitches off their respective needles. And again, knit into both of these stitches and knit them together. And now, with 2 stitches on my 3rd needle, I can pass the first one over the second one to bind off 1 stitch. Again, knit 1 stitch of each of the needles together. Bind off 1. And continue fiddling around like this until you've bound off all your stitches and seamed your 2 ends together. All that's left is to fasten off. And check this part out. There's your seam. Now you see it. Now you don't. Well, I gotta fix this little loose stitch here, but how awesome is that? A perfectly seamless braid all the way around. So there you have it. 2 completely different methods for knitting a chunky braided headband. Let me know which one's your favorite, or if you're going to try the beginner one and work your way up to the cables. And as always, I'll have links to the written versions of these patterns down below so you can work on them on your own time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!